My name is Tom, and I've been married to Jessica for about 7 years now. Jessica, the woman I thought was my soulmate, the one I planned to spend the rest of my life with, has turned out to be a different person than I imagined. We met in college, back when life was simpler and everything seemed to be falling into place. Jessica was the kind of woman who could light up a room with her smile, and I was the guy who was proud to have her by my side. After graduation, we got married, and life took off like a rocket. I landed a solid job in finance, and Jessica worked her way up in marketing. We bought a cozy house in the suburbs, the kind you see in the movies with a white picket fence and a lush green lawn. Things were good, or at least I thought they were. Jessica had always been ambitious, driven, and incredibly smart. She got a job as a marketing director at a reputable firm, which meant longer hours and more responsibilities. I was proud of her achievements, even when it meant we spent less time together. I figured it was just part of the deal when you're both focused on your careers. After all, we were building a life together. But then, things started to change. It was subtle at first. Missed dinners, late-night meetings, and work trips that seemed to pop up out of nowhere. I chalked it up to the demands of her job. She'd always been a workaholic, so I didn't think much of it. In fact, I admired her dedication. However, as the months passed, I started to notice other changes. Jessica became distant, more irritable, and less interested in the things we used to enjoy together. Our conversations grew shorter, less meaningful, and more superficial. When we did talk, it was mostly about her work or the house. I convinced myself that it was just a phase, a rough patch we needed to get through. But deep down, a nagging feeling in my gut told me something was wrong. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed that Jessica had left her phone on the kitchen counter. It was buzzing with notifications, something it never used to do. Jessica had always been protective of her phone, keeping it close by and locked with a password I didn't know. But tonight, she had forgotten it, probably distracted by the endless stream of work emails and texts. I hesitated. I knew it was wrong to invade her privacy, but that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. My heart pounded as I picked up her phone, my hands trembling slightly. I unlocked it using the passcode I had memorized a few months back when she entered it in front of me. The first thing that caught my eye was a string of messages from her boss, Ryan. Ryan was the CEO of the company where Jessica worked. I had met him a few times at company events, charming, charismatic, and way too close to my wife for my comfort. I never liked the way he looked at her, but I brushed it off as jealousy. After all, he was her boss, and I trusted Jessica. Or at least I wanted to. The messages between them weren't exactly incriminating at first glance, just the usual work-related stuff. But the tone was different, more personal, more familiar than what I would expect between a boss and an employee. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A message from Ryan that read, "Can't stop thinking about our last meeting. When can we do it again?" My heart sank. I scrolled up, my breath catching in my throat as I saw the full conversation. It wasn't just one message. It was a whole thread of flirty texts, innuendos, and even a few pictures that made my stomach churn. The worst part was the realization that this wasn't a recent development. It had been going on for months, right under my nose. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. The woman I loved, the one I had promised to spend my life with, was cheating on me. And not just with anyone, but with her boss. The betrayal was like a punch to the gut, knocking the wind out of me. I had to sit down, my mind racing with thoughts of what this meant for our marriage, our future, everything we had built together. But I couldn't confront her yet. I needed to know more, to be sure that what I was seeing wasn't some horrible misunderstanding. I had to find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. And so, I began to dig deeper, setting myself on a path that I knew would only lead to more pain, more heartbreak. Looking back, maybe I should have seen the signs earlier. Maybe I could have done something to prevent it. But hindsight is always 20/20ths, and here I was, faced with the reality that my wife, the woman I thought I knew, was not the person I believed her to be. After discovering the flirty messages between Jessica and her boss, Ryan, I couldn't sleep that night. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and confusion. How long had this been going on? What had I done wrong? Why wasn't I enough for her? These questions kept me up, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together the fragments of our life that suddenly seemed like a lie. The next day at work was a blur. I couldn't focus, couldn't think straight. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those messages, saw her smiling face as she texted him, probably laughing at my cluelessness. My coworkers noticed something was off, but I brushed them off with a forced smile and some excuse about a bad night's sleep. I needed to know more, needed to catch them in the act, no matter how painful it would be. Part of me hoped that what I found would be less than what my mind had imagined, but another part of me, the darker, more desperate part, wanted confirmation. I wanted the truth, raw and unfiltered, so I could finally confront her with irrefutable evidence. That evening, I came home early, under the pretense of a stomach bug. Jessica wasn't home yet, so I started setting up. We had a decent home security system with cameras in the living room and outside, but nothing in the bedroom or the more private areas of the house. That was about to change. I bought a small, discreet camera, the kind you can hide in plain sight, and placed it strategically in our bedroom. It was a gut-wrenching decision, but I knew it was the only way to get the proof I needed. The camera was tiny, hidden among the decorative clutter on our dresser. It had a clear view of the bed, and with the way it was angled, it would capture everything that happened there. I tested it a few times, making sure the video feed was working perfectly and that it wouldn't be detected. The plan was simple. I'd go out of town on a business trip, give Jessica the opportunity to invite Ryan over, and catch them in the act. A couple of days later, I told Jessica I had a last-minute work trip that would keep me away for the night. She seemed only mildly interested, distracted as usual by her phone. She didn't even ask where I was going, just nodded and said, "Okay, be safe." That indifference stung more than I expected. That evening, I packed a small overnight bag, kissed her on the cheek, and left the house, pretending to head to the airport. Instead, I drove around for a while, my heart pounding as I watched the minutes tick by. Finally, when I couldn't stand the suspense any longer, I parked a few blocks away from our house and walked back. I made sure to approach from the back, staying hidden in the shadows as I reached the side of our house. From my spot, I had a clear view of the driveway and front door. I just had to wait. It didn't take long. Less than an hour after I left, I saw Ryan's car pull up. He parked a little down the street, trying to be discreet, but I recognized it immediately. My heart raced as I watched him get out and walk up to the house. Jessica opened the door before he even knocked, smiling that warm, inviting smile that used to be reserved for me. They kissed right there on the doorstep, a quick, casual peck that spoke of familiarity, of routine. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms as I fought the urge to storm in and confront them then and there. But I needed the video, needed to see it for myself, as painful as it would be. So I waited, crouching in the shadows, my anger boiling over as they disappeared inside. I pulled out my phone and connected to the camera feed. The image was crystal clear. The camera had been positioned perfectly, and there they were, right in the center of the frame. Jessica was leading him upstairs, laughing softly as they climbed the steps. My breath caught in my throat as they entered our bedroom, the room we had shared for years, and shut the door behind them. For a moment I couldn't watch. I felt sick, my stomach churning with a mix of rage and despair. But I forced myself to look, forced myself to witness the betrayal that was unfolding in front of me. Ryan was all over her the moment they were inside. He kissed her deeply, his hands wandering over her body as if he owned her. Jessica responded eagerly, pulling him closer, moaning softly as he kissed her neck. They didn't waste any time. Within minutes, they were on the bed, tearing each other's clothes off like they couldn't get enough of each other. Watching them together was like being stabbed in the chest over and over again. Every touch, every kiss, every moan felt like a knife twisting deeper into my heart. I recorded it all, every sordid detail, every moment of passion between them. I captured it on my phone. It was the most painful thing I had ever done, but I knew it was necessary. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about exposing the truth, about making sure that when I confronted her, there would be no way for her to deny it. But as I watched them, something in me snapped. The rage that had been simmering beneath the surface finally boiled over. I couldn't just stand by and watch them defile my home, my marriage any longer. I needed to act, needed to make him pay for what he was doing. I slipped in through the back door, moving as quietly as I could. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but I pushed the fear aside, focusing on the anger that fueled me. I crept up the stairs, my mind blank except for one thought. I was going to make him pay. When I reached the bedroom, the door was slightly ajar. I could hear them inside, the bed creaking under their weight, Jessica's breathless moans, Ryan's low grunts. I kicked the door open with all my strength, the force of it slamming the door against the wall with a loud bang. The scene inside was exactly what I expected, yet somehow worse. Jessica was on her back, her legs wrapped around Ryan's waist as he thrust into her with a rhythm that made my blood boil. Her eyes flew open in shock as the door burst open, and she let out a scream, trying to push Ryan off of her. But he was too stunned to move, frozen in place like a deer caught in the headlights. "What the fuck?" he shouted, scrambling to pull away from Jessica and cover himself. But I didn't give him the chance. The rage inside me exploded, and I lunged at him, grabbing him by the throat and dragging him off the bed. "You piece of shit!" I roared, slamming him against the wall with a force that shook the entire room. "How fucking dare you!" Ryan was gasping, clawing at my hands as I squeezed his throat, but I didn't care. All I could see was red, all I could feel was the overwhelming need to make him suffer. Jessica was screaming, trying to pull me off of him, but I shoved her away with one arm, my focus entirely on the man who had destroyed my life. I let go of his throat just long enough to land a punch squarely in his face. There was a sickening crunch as my fist connected with his nose, and blood sprayed everywhere, but it wasn't enough. I wanted to break him, to make him feel a fraction of the pain he had caused me. "Tom, stop!" Jessica was screaming, her voice shrill and desperate, but I didn't stop. I landed another punch, this one to his gut, doubling him over. He collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, but I wasn't finished. I kicked him hard in the ribs, feeling a grim satisfaction as he cried out in pain. "Tom, please!" Jessica was begging now, tears streaming down her face as she tried to pull me away. But I was beyond reason, beyond mercy. I wanted him to suffer, wanted to make sure he never forgot the consequences of fucking another man's wife. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I stepped back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Ryan was a crumpled heap on the floor, bloodied and bruised, barely conscious. Jessica was sobbing, clutching a blanket to her chest as she knelt beside him, her eyes wide with fear and shock. I looked down at them, at the wreckage of my life, and felt a cold emptiness settle in my chest. I had done what I needed to do, but it hadn't brought me the satisfaction I thought it would. The betrayal still hung heavy in the air, poisoning everything it touched. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them both behind. The only sound was Jessica's sobs, echoing down the hallway as I descended the stairs. I didn't look back, didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. I got into my car and drove away, not caring where I was going, just needing to escape. The anger had drained out of me, leaving behind a hollow numbness that I didn't know how to deal with. I had the proof, had the satisfaction of beating the shit out of the man who had betrayed me. But it didn't change anything. My marriage was over. My life as I knew it was shattered, and there was no going back. After driving aimlessly for hours, I eventually found myself parked on the edge of a deserted lot, the city lights twinkling in the distance like a far-off dream. My mind was still racing, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The numbness was beginning to fade, replaced by a searing pain that gnawed at my insides. Jessica's betrayal wasn't just a wound. It was a deep, festering infection that had spread through every part of my being. But I knew I couldn't stay out there forever. Sooner or later, I'd have to go back and face Jessica, confront her about the destruction she'd wrought on our marriage. The thought of seeing her again made my stomach churn, but I needed answers. I needed to hear her try to justify what she had done, even though I knew nothing she said could ever make it right. With a heavy sigh, I turned the car around and headed back home. The drive felt like an eternity, each mile bringing me closer to the confrontation I dreaded. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the house was dark and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded just hours earlier. My hands trembled as I killed the engine, and I sat there for a moment, trying to gather the courage to go inside. I finally forced myself out of the car and approached the front door. My footsteps echoed in the stillness of the night, and I half expected Jessica to come running out, begging for forgiveness. But the house remained eerily silent, the only sound the creak of the door as I pushed it open. The living room was empty, dimly lit by a single lamp in the corner. It looked exactly as it always did, neat, orderly, a picture of domestic tranquility. But the air was thick with tension, like a coiled spring waiting to snap. I walked through the house, my heart pounding in my chest as I made my way up the stairs to our bedroom. The door was still ajar, just as I had left it. I hesitated, standing in the hallway trying to steel myself for what I was about to face. Finally, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Jessica was sitting on the edge of the bed, still wrapped in the blanket she had grabbed during the confrontation. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying, and her face was a mask of misery. Ryan was gone, probably slunk away to lick his wounds, leaving Jessica to deal with the fallout alone. She looked up as I entered, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and desperation. "Tom," she began, her voice trembling, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Don't," I said, my voice cold and emotionless. "Don't say a fucking word until I've had my say." Jessica's mouth snapped shut, and she nodded, tears welling up in her eyes again. I felt no pity for her. She had done this to herself, to us. She deserved every ounce of pain she was feeling. I stood there staring at her, trying to find the right words. But all that came out was the question that had been burning in my mind since the moment I found those texts. "Why, Jessica? Why did you do it?" She flinched at the question, her hands clutching the blanket tighter around her. I don't know," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "It just happened." "Bullshit," I snapped, the anger flaring up inside me again. "You don't just accidentally fuck your boss in our bed, Jessica. Don't give me that it just happened crap. You made a choice. You chose to betray me." She winced at the harshness of my words, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Tom," she choked out. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" I repeated, my voice dripping with venom. "You're sorry. Sorry doesn't fucking cut it, Jessica. Sorry doesn't erase the fact that you cheated on me, that you lied to me for months. You destroyed everything we had, everything we built together. And for what? A quick fuck with your boss?" She shook her head frantically, her hands trembling as she reached out toward me. "No, Tom, it wasn't like that. I never meant for it to go this far. I love you. I swear, I still love you." "Love?" I scoffed, stepping back out of her reach. "You call this love? What kind of love leads you to spread your legs for another man while your husband is out working to provide for you? What kind of love makes you lie to my face, day after day, while you're fucking someone else behind my back?" Jessica crumpled, burying her face in her hands as sobs racked her body. "I don't know," she cried, her voice muffled by her hands. "I don't know why I did it. I was lonely, Tom. You were always working, always so busy, and I—" She broke off, her sobs making it impossible for her to speak. "Don't you dare blame this on me," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I was working for us, Jessica, for our future. And this is how you repay me, by fucking your boss because you're lonely. You disgust me." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic. "Please, Tom, don't say that. Don't hate me. I made a mistake, a horrible mistake, but I still love you. We can work through this. I know we can. Please, just give me a chance to make it right." I stared at her, my mind reeling. How could she think that anything could make this right? How could she believe that we could ever go back to the way things were after what she had done? "Make it right?" I echoed, my voice dripping with disbelief. "There's nothing you can do to make this right, Jessica. You broke us. You broke me." Jessica shook her head desperately, her hands reaching out to me again. "No, Tom. Please. I'll do anything. Just tell me what I need to do. I'll quit my job. I'll never see Ryan again. I'll do whatever it takes." "Anything?" I said, my voice cold. "Would you undo it if you could? Would you take back every time you spread your legs for him? Every time you let him touch you? Kiss you? Fuck you in our bed? Can you take that back, Jessica?" She flinched at my words, her face crumpling with shame. I can't," she whispered, her voice broken. "But I swear, Tom, it meant nothing. He meant nothing. It was just sex. It didn't mean anything." "Just sex?" I repeated, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "It was just sex? Do you even hear yourself, Jessica? Do you even understand what you're saying?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I do. I know I fucked up, Tom. I know I did something terrible, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But please, please don't throw everything away because of one mistake. One mistake? I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and grating in the silent room. This wasn't one mistake, Jessica. This was a betrayal, a deliberate, calculated betrayal. You knew exactly what you were doing every time you let him touch you, every time you let him fuck you. And you did it anyway. She sobbed harder, her whole body shaking as she clung to the blanket. Please, Tom, please don't leave me. I can't lose you. I love you. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you. Please give me another chance. I stared at her, the woman I had loved for so many years, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone in the world. And all I felt was a cold, hollow emptiness. The Jessica I loved was gone, replaced by this desperate, broken shell of a woman who had betrayed everything we once had. I don't know if I can do that, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Jessica. Not after what you've done. She let out a wail of despair, collapsing onto the bed as the sobs racked her body. I watched her for a moment, feeling nothing but a numb sense of finality. This was the end of us, the end of everything we had built together. There was no going back from this. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her behind to cry into the empty space where our love used to be. I didn't know what would happen next. Didn't know if I would ever be able to forgive her, or if I even wanted to. All I knew was that I needed to get away from her, away from the wreckage of our marriage, and figure out what my next move would be. As I descended the stairs, I could still hear Jessica's sobs echoing down the hallway, a haunting reminder of the life we had lost. I felt a pang of regret, of sadness for what could have been, but it was quickly swallowed up by the cold, hard truth of her betrayal. This was the end, but it was also the beginning of something new. What that would be, I didn't know. But I knew one thing for certain. I would never be the same again. After leaving Jessica sobbing in the bedroom, I found myself in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter, trying to steady the whirlwind of emotions inside me. The numbness that had carried me through the confrontation was beginning to wear off, replaced by a cold, simmering rage. The image of Jessica and Ryan together, her hands on his body, the way she moaned for him, was burned into my mind, a constant reminder of the betrayal that had shattered my life. As I stood there, I realized that just confronting her wasn't enough. She needed to feel the consequences of her actions, needed to understand the magnitude of the pain she had caused. The thought of letting her walk away with nothing more than a few tears and empty apologies made my blood boil. She had destroyed our marriage, our life together, and she couldn't be allowed to just move on without facing the full weight of what she had done. And that's when it hit me. The video. The footage I had recorded of her and Ryan, caught in the act, was more than just proof of her infidelity. It was a weapon, something that could show the world the truth about her, could strip away the facade she had built around herself. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. Jessica needed to face public humiliation, to be exposed for the deceitful woman she truly was. I went back to my car and retrieved my laptop from the trunk, my mind racing with the plan that was quickly taking shape. I brought it into the living room, opened it up, and connected to the camera feed. The video was right there, saved in a folder on my desktop. I clicked on it, my hand steady despite the anger coursing through me. The video played out exactly as I remembered. The bedroom scene, the way she kissed Ryan with such hunger, the way she let him fuck her in our bed. It was all there, captured in perfect detail. I watched it again, the rage building inside me. But this time, it was mixed with a grim sense of satisfaction. This was my weapon, my way of making sure she couldn't hide from what she had done. I opened my email and quickly typed out a message, attaching the video file to it. The recipients were carefully chosen. Her closest friends, her colleagues, even some of our mutual friends who had always looked up to us as the perfect couple. I didn't include Ryan on the list. He would get his in due time. This was about Jessica, about exposing her for the lying, cheating bitch she had become. The subject line was simple: the truth about Jessica. And in the body of the email, I wrote only one line. This is what your friend/wife/coworker has been doing behind my back. I didn't sign it, didn't add any further explanation. The video spoke for itself. I hovered over the send button for a moment, my finger trembling with a mix of anticipation and dread. This was it, the point of no return. But there was no hesitation in me, no second thoughts. Jessica had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. I pressed send. The email disappeared from my screen, and I leaned back in my chair, the weight of what I had just done slowly settling over me. There was no going back now. The video was out there, and it was only a matter of time before the fallout began. I didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, my phone started buzzing with notifications, texts, calls, emails, all from people who had received the video. I ignored them, knowing exactly what they would say. The shock, the disbelief, the pity. None of it mattered. All I cared about was making sure that Jessica's betrayal was exposed, that she couldn't hide from the truth. It wasn't long before I heard her coming down the stairs, her footsteps hesitant, as if she knew something was wrong. I remained seated, staring at my laptop screen as she entered the living room. Her eyes were red from crying, her face pale and drawn. She looked like a ghost of the woman she once was. "Tom?" she asked, her voice shaky. "What are you doing?" I turned to face her, my expression cold and unforgiving. "I just sent a little message to all your friends," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "You know, the video of you and Ryan fucking in our bed. Thought they'd like to see the real you." Her eyes widened in horror and she staggered back as if I had struck her. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. You sent it to them?" I nodded slowly, watching as the realization of what I had done sank in. "Yeah, I did. They all know now, Jessica. They know exactly what kind of person you are." Her hands flew to her mouth, and she let out a strangled sob. "How could you?" she cried, her voice breaking. "How could you do this to me?" I stood up, towering over her as she crumpled to the floor. "How could I do this to you?" I repeated, my voice rising with anger. "How could you do this to me, Jessica? You destroyed our marriage. You betrayed me in the worst possible way. And you think I'm the one who's in the wrong." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Tom. I'm so sorry. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But this is too much. You're ruining my life." "Your life?" I snarled, the anger boiling over again. "What about my life, Jessica? What about everything we had? You threw it all away for a cheap fuck with your boss? And now you're crying because you have to face the consequences? Fuck you, Jessica!" She was sobbing uncontrollably now, her body shaking as she tried to grasp what had just happened. "Please, Tom," she begged, reaching out to me. "Please don't do this. We can fix this. We can—" I cut her off with a harsh laugh. "Fix this? There's no fixing this, Jessica. It's over. We're over. You made your choice, and now you're going to have to live with it." She collapsed completely, curling into a ball on the floor as the reality of her situation hit her like a freight train. I watched her for a moment, feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction at seeing her like this. She deserved it. She deserved every bit of pain, every tear, every ounce of humiliation. I turned away from her, grabbing my keys off the counter. "I'm leaving," I said coldly. "I'll be back to get my things later. Don't bother trying to contact me. We're done." With that, I walked out the door, leaving Jessica sobbing on the floor, the echoes of her betrayal ringing in my ears. I didn't look back, didn't allow myself to feel any pity or regret. She had made her bed, literally, and now she had to lie in it. As I drove away, my phone buzzed again, another message notification. I glanced at it, seeing that it was from one of Jessica's friends, someone I had met a few times at social gatherings. I opened the message, expecting more of the same shocked responses I had been ignoring. But this one was different. "Tom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Jessica was always so... I can't believe she did this. But please don't let this destroy you. You're a good man, and you don't deserve this. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." I stared at the message for a moment, the words slowly sinking in. A good man. The phrase felt foreign to me now, like something from a past life. I didn't feel like a good man. I felt like someone who had just thrown a grenade into the middle of his life and watched it explode. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe this was the first step toward reclaiming that title. Exposing Jessica's betrayal wasn't just about revenge. It was about taking control, about refusing to be the victim. It was about standing up for myself, even if it meant doing something that felt so cold and calculated. The road ahead was uncertain, and I knew there would be more pain, more fallout from what I had done. But for the first time since discovering her betrayal, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild, could find a way to move on from the wreckage of my marriage and start fresh. I didn't know what the future held, but as I drove away from the house that had once been our home, I knew one thing for sure. I was done being the victim. It was time to take back control of my life, to find out who I was without Jessica, and to rebuild on my terms. And Jessica? She would have to live with the consequences of her actions, just as I had to live with the scars she had left behind. But those scars would heal, and when they did, I would be stronger for it. Stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next. Driving away from the house felt like a small victory. But as I put distance between myself and the wreckage of my marriage, a new fire began to burn within me. Exposing Jessica's infidelity had been satisfying, but it wasn't enough. Ryan, the man who had seduced my wife and helped tear apart everything I'd built, still needed to pay. He wasn't just some clueless pawn. He knew exactly what he was doing. He had taken what wasn't his and flaunted it, and I wasn't about to let him walk away unscathed. The thought of Ryan lying low, licking his wounds after the beating I gave him, made my blood boil. He might have been physically hurt, but that wasn't nearly enough. The humiliation I'd inflicted on Jessica had to extend to him as well. I needed to make sure he felt the full weight of his actions, to make sure he knew that he'd messed with the wrong man. As I drove, a plan began to form in my mind. One that would ensure Ryan couldn't escape the consequences of what he'd done. I couldn't just confront him again. That would be too easy, and I wasn't about to risk another physical altercation that could end with me in jail. No, this required something more calculated, something that would hit him where it hurt the most. His reputation, his career, his life. I pulled over into a quiet parking lot and opened my laptop. The video was still there, a damning piece of evidence that could ruin not just Jessica, but Ryan as well. I could use this to destroy him professionally and personally, to ensure that he was haunted by his actions just as much as Jessica was. The first step was to find out where Ryan stood professionally. I knew he was the CEO of the company where Jessica worked, but that wasn't enough. I needed to dig deeper, find out about his business relationships, his professional network, and the people who could be affected by the truth of what he'd done. It didn't take long to find his LinkedIn profile, filled with glowing recommendations and connections to influential people in the industry. Perfect. I composed a new email, this one far more targeted than the one I'd sent out about Jessica. This time, the recipients were key figures in Ryan's professional circle. Board members, investors, major clients, and a few other high-level executives who would be horrified to learn what kind of man was running their company. I attached the video, adding a brief but damning message. To those who need to know the truth about Ryan and his conduct behind closed doors. No other explanation was necessary. I hovered over the send button, feeling that same sense of anticipation and dread I'd felt when exposing Jessica. But this was different. This was about more than just revenge. It was about justice. Ryan had abused his position of power, manipulated my wife, and violated the sanctity of my marriage. He deserved to be taken down, to lose everything he had worked for, just like I had lost everything that mattered to me. I pressed send. The email was out, the video making its way to the inboxes of the people who had the power to destroy Ryan's career. There was no turning back now. I leaned back in my seat, exhaling a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The weight of what I had just done settled over me, but instead of guilt, I felt a grim satisfaction. Ryan wasn't going to get away with this. Not if I had anything to say about it. I stayed parked there for a while, watching the notifications on my phone light up one after another. It didn't take long for the responses to start coming in. Some were just shocked, others furious. But they all had one thing in common. Ryan was finished. The whispers of scandal were already starting to spread, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the fallout reached him directly. I imagined him sitting in his office, oblivious to the storm that was about to crash down on him. Maybe he was licking his wounds, still reeling from the beating I gave him. Or maybe he was arrogant enough to believe he could walk away from this unscathed. Either way, his world was about to come crashing down around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But I wasn't done yet. The email was just the first step. The next part of my plan required a bit more finesse, something that would ensure Ryan's disgrace was as public and humiliating as possible. I searched for Ryan's social media profiles, finding the usual array of polished professional images, the kind of carefully curated content designed to project success and confidence. His Twitter and Instagram accounts were filled with business updates, pictures from corporate events, and the occasional glimpse into his perfect life. All of it was about to be torn apart. I started with Twitter, crafting a post from a newly created anonymous account that tagged not only Ryan, but also some of his business contacts and major clients. The post was blunt and to the point. Is this the kind of man you want representing your company? Watch the video and decide for yourself. I included a link to the video, making sure it was hosted on a platform that wouldn't take it down easily. Next, I moved on to Instagram, posting a similar message in the comments of his most recent post, a photo of him smiling at a charity event, shaking hands with a local politician. The contrast between the image and the message I left was stark, and I knew it would catch the attention of anyone who saw it. The ripple effect was almost immediate. The video began to spread, shared and retweeted by people who couldn't believe what they were seeing. Ryan's name started trending, but not for the reasons he would have liked. The scandal was quickly becoming public knowledge, and the backlash was brutal. His carefully constructed image was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I watched it all unfold from the safety of my car, a twisted sense of satisfaction settling over me as I saw the impact of my actions. Ryan's world was unraveling, his reputation being torn to shreds, and it was all because he had crossed the wrong man. But as satisfying as it was to see him fall, I knew this was only the beginning. The scandal would spread, and soon it would reach every corner of his life. His family, his friends, his colleagues. They would all see him for what he truly was, and he would be forced to confront the consequences of his actions in the most public and humiliating way possible. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it, expecting another shocked response, but instead, it was a simple text. You're going to pay for this. I stared at the message for a moment, then chuckled. Ryan was trying to fight back, trying to regain some semblance of control, but it was too late. The damage was done, and there was no way he could stop the tidal wave of consequences that was about to crash down on him. I ignored the text, blocking the number and tossing my phone onto the passenger seat. Ryan could threaten me all he wanted, but it wouldn't change a damn thing. He had already lost, and the only thing left for him to do was watch his life fall apart. As I drove away, the city lights flickering in the distance, I felt a sense of closure begin to settle over me. Jessica had been exposed, Ryan had been ruined, and I had taken back control of my life in the only way I knew how. The future was still uncertain, and the pain of their betrayal was still fresh. But at least now, I could move forward knowing that they wouldn't walk away from this unscathed. I didn't know where I was headed, but as I drove into the night, I felt the weight of the past few days begin to lift. There was still so much to process, so much to figure out, but for the first time since discovering their affair, I felt like I could breathe again. The road ahead would be long, and there were still battles to fight. Legal battles, emotional battles, but at least now I was ready to face them. Ryan and Jessica had taken everything from me, but they hadn't broken me. I was still standing, and I was stronger for it. As for Ryan, his life would never be the same. The video would haunt him for the rest of his days, a permanent reminder of the price he paid for crossing the wrong man. And Jessica? She would have to live with the knowledge that she had destroyed everything good in her life for a man who was now nothing more than a disgraced memory. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done being a victim. I had taken my revenge, and now it was time to start rebuilding. On my terms, in my own way, and without the people who had betrayed me. The darkness of the night began to fade as I drove on, the first light of dawn breaking on the horizon. A new day was coming, and with it, the promise of a fresh start. And this time, I was ready for it. The morning after I sent the video to Ryan's contacts and watched his life implode, I knew I couldn't put off the inevitable any longer. It was time to confront Jessica about the finality of our marriage, to face the harsh reality that there was no going back. The rage and satisfaction from the previous day had left me drained, and all that remained was a deep, aching sense of loss. The woman I had once loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who had betrayed me in the most unforgivable way. I spent the early hours of the morning going over everything in my head, trying to figure out how to approach the conversation. I wasn't going to shout, wasn't going to rage. I was done with that. This time, I needed to be clear, calm, and resolute. I needed to make sure Jessica understood that there was no chance for reconciliation, no way to salvage what was left of our marriage. When I finally walked back into the house, the tension was palpable. Jessica was in the living room, sitting on the couch with her head in her hands. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red and swollen from crying, her face pale and drawn. The sight of her filled me with a strange mix of pity and anger, but I pushed it aside. This wasn't about feelings anymore. It was about ending things properly. "Tom," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Save it." I cut her off, my tone flat and emotionless. "We need to talk, Jessica. About the divorce." She flinched at the word as if I had slapped her, but she didn't argue. Instead, she nodded slowly, her eyes filling with fresh tears. "I don't want a divorce, Tom," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I know I've hurt you, more than I can ever make up for, but I don't want to lose you. Please, just give me a chance to make things right." "There's nothing to make right, Jessica," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "It's over. You made your choice when you decided to cheat on me with Ryan, and there's no coming back from that. You broke my trust, and without that, there's no marriage left." She shook her head desperately, her hands trembling as she reached out to me. "I know I fucked up, Tom. I know I did something terrible, but I still love you. We can fix this. I'll do anything. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Just please don't throw everything away." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "You think this is about throwing things away?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Jessica, you threw it all away the moment you let him touch you, the moment you invited him into our bed. How do you expect me to move past that? How do you expect me to ever trust you again?" She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, but I remained unmoved. I had to be strong, had to make her understand that this wasn't just some bump in the road that we could smooth over. This was the end. "I can't forgive you, Jessica," I said firmly, my voice laced with finality. "And I'm not going to try. What you did was unforgivable. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm not changing my mind." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic. "Please, Tom," she begged, her voice cracking. "I don't want to lose you. I'll quit my job. I'll cut all ties with Ryan. I'll do anything. Just don't leave me." "I already have," I replied coldly. "You just haven't realized it yet. There's nothing left for us, Jessica. You destroyed everything we had, and I'm not going to pretend that it can be fixed." She collapsed back onto the couch, her sobs growing louder, but I didn't waver. I knew this was hard for her, but it was hard for me too. I had loved her once, truly, deeply loved her, but that love was gone, snuffed out by the betrayal that had poisoned our marriage. I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the stack of papers I had printed out earlier that morning. "These are the divorce papers," I said, holding them out to her. "I've already signed them. You can either sign them now, or you can fight it in court. But I'm done, Jessica. I'm done with us." She stared at the papers as if they were a death sentence, her hands trembling as she reached out to take them. "Tom," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't do this, please." But I was resolute. "You should get a lawyer," I said, ignoring her plea. "This is going to be as clean and quick as possible. I don't want to drag it out, but I will if I have to." Jessica's tears fell onto the papers, leaving dark smudges on the stark white pages. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a desperate kind of sorrow. "I'm so sorry, Tom," she whispered. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you." "Then why did you?" I asked, my voice soft but cold. "Why did you betray me like this?" She shook her head, her face crumpling with grief. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I was stupid. I was lonely. I don't know, Tom. I don't know why I did it. But I swear, it didn't mean anything. He didn't mean anything." It meant everything, I replied, my voice firm. It meant the end of us. It meant that our marriage was a lie. You can tell yourself whatever you need to, but don't try to minimize what you did. You destroyed us, Jessica. You destroyed me. She sobbed harder, clutching the divorce papers to her chest, as if they were the only thing keeping her from falling apart. I watched her, feeling a mixture of anger and pity. I wanted to hate her, wanted to lash out and make her feel the same pain I felt, but I couldn't. The only thing I felt now was emptiness, a hollow space where my love for her used to be. I'll be staying at a hotel for the next few days, I said, my voice flat. Take that time to decide what you want to do. But know this, Jessica. There's no coming back from this. We're done, and I won't be changing my mind. She didn't respond, just nodded weakly, her tears soaking through the papers. I turned and walked toward the door, feeling the weight of the past few days pressing down on me like a boulder. But I knew I was doing the right thing. There was no saving our marriage, no salvaging what was left. All that was left was to cut ties and move on. I paused at the doorway, glancing back at Jessica one last time. She was still sitting on the couch, clutching the divorce papers as if they were her lifeline, her body racked with sobs. A part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay, but I knew that would be a lie. Nothing would ever be okay again. Not for us. Goodbye, Jessica, I said quietly, my voice tinged with the finality of the word. And with that, I walked out the door, leaving her behind to deal with the mess she had created. As I stepped outside, the sun was shining, the world going on as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. I was no longer a husband, no longer part of a marriage. I was a man starting over, alone, but at least I was free. The drive to the hotel was a blur, my mind consumed by the enormity of what had just happened. I had just ended my marriage, just walked away from the woman I had vowed to spend my life with. But as painful as it was, I knew it was the right decision. There was no point in holding on to something that had already died. At the hotel, I checked in, ignoring the curious glances from the receptionist as she handed me the keycard. I made my way up to the room, the emptiness inside me growing with every step. When I finally entered the room and shut the door behind me, the silence was deafening. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I had done it. I had ended my marriage. But instead of relief, all I felt was a deep, aching sorrow. I reached for my phone, hesitating for a moment before scrolling through my contacts. My finger hovered over the name of my lawyer, the person who would help me finalize the end of my marriage. But before I could press it, another name caught my eye. Jessica's. For a moment I considered calling her, hearing her voice one last time. But I quickly pushed the thought away. It was over. I had said my goodbyes and there was nothing more to say. All that was left was to let go. I put the phone down, leaning back on the bed as the reality of the situation settled over me. The room was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioner. I stared up at the ceiling, my mind blank. The events of the past few days playing out in my head like a movie I couldn't turn off. The love I had once felt for Jessica was gone, replaced by a cold, empty void. The anger, the rage, the desire for revenge, they had all faded, leaving behind nothing but a deep sense of loss. I had lost my wife, my partner, the woman I had once believed would be by my side forever. But I hadn't lost myself. The realization hit me like a wave, washing over me with a strange sense of clarity. I was still here. I was still standing. Jessica had betrayed me, had destroyed our marriage, but she hadn't destroyed me. I was still alive, still capable of moving on, of starting over. And that's exactly what I was going to do. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that I would write on my own terms. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I would face it with my head held high, ready to rebuild, to reclaim my life. I closed my eyes, letting out a long, slow breath. The road ahead would be hard, but it was mine to walk. And with every step, I would be leaving the past further behind, moving toward a future that I would shape for myself. The first step was the divorce. The rest would come in time. The following morning, I woke up in the hotel room with a sense of clarity that hadn't been there the day before. The previous night had been a blur of emotions, grief, anger, and exhaustion. But as the sun streamed through the curtains, I felt a strange sense of peace. The decision had been made. My marriage was over, and now it was time to tie up the loose ends and move forward. After grabbing a quick shower and dressing in the clothes I had thrown into my overnight bag, I sat down at the small desk in the hotel room and picked up my phone. The first call I made was to my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Marcia, who had come highly recommended by a friend. I had spoken to her briefly when I first discovered Jessica's affair, but now it was time to finalize everything. "Marcia, it's Tom," I said when she answered the phone. "I'm ready to move forward with the divorce." There was a brief pause on the other end before she responded, her tone professional but not unkind. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Tom, but you're doing the right thing. Let's get started." We spent the next hour going over the details, the assets we needed to divide, the financials, and the process for filing the papers. Marcia was efficient, guiding me through the legal jargon and making sure I understood every step. It was a relief to have someone on my side, someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. "Do you think Jessica will contest the divorce?" Marcia asked as we wrapped up the conversation. I hesitated, thinking back to the look on Jessica's face when I handed her the papers. She had been devastated, broken by the reality of what she had done, but she hadn't fought back. "I don't think so," I said finally. "She knows it's over. She might not want to let go, but she knows there's no point in dragging it out." Marcia hummed thoughtfully. "Good. That will make things easier. I'll file the papers today. Once they're served, she'll have 30 days to respond. After that, it's just a matter of going through the motions." "Thank you, Marcia," I said, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. "I appreciate everything you're doing." "It's my job, Tom," she replied, her tone softening slightly. "But if you need anything else, legal advice or just someone to talk to, don't hesitate to reach out. You're going to get through this." I ended the call and set the phone down, letting out a long breath. The divorce process had officially begun. There was no turning back now, and oddly enough, that realization brought me a sense of relief. The uncertainty, the limbo I had been living in, was over. Now, it was just a matter of time before I could close this chapter of my life for good, but even as I tried to focus on the future, I knew there were still a few things left to resolve. Jessica and I had built a life together, a life that needed to be dismantled piece by piece. There were shared accounts to close, assets to divide, and decisions to make about the house. But most of all, there were emotional loose ends that needed to be tied up, no matter how painful it would be. After a quick breakfast at the hotel's restaurant, I decided it was time to face one of those loose ends head on. I drove back to the house, the place that had once been my home, but now felt like a stranger's. The air felt heavy as I parked in the driveway, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me. When I stepped inside, the house was eerily quiet. Jessica was sitting at the kitchen table, the divorce papers spread out in front of her. She looked up as I entered, her eyes still red from crying, but there was a resignation in her expression that hadn't been there before. She knew this was the end. "Tom," she said quietly, her voice hoarse. I'm not here to argue, Jessica," I interrupted, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. "I just want to go over a few things and make sure we're on the same page." She nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to the papers in front of her. "Okay." I sat down across from her, my eyes scanning the documents she had clearly spent the night poring over. "First, the house," I said, cutting straight to the point. "Do you want to keep it?" Jessica hesitated, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know if I can stay here, not after everything that's happened." I nodded, understanding her reluctance. The house was filled with memories, both good and bad, and it was hard to imagine either of us living there without being haunted by the past. "I don't want it either," I said, my voice firm. "We can sell it, split the proceeds. It'll be a clean break." She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine for something. Maybe understanding, maybe forgiveness. But I kept my expression neutral, not wanting to give her false hope. "Okay," she agreed quietly. "Selling it sounds like the best option." We spent the next hour discussing the practical details. closing the joint accounts, dividing the assets, and deciding what to do with our belongings. It was a painful process, made even more difficult by the emotions that kept bubbling up, threatening to break through the surface. But I forced myself to stay focused, to keep the conversation as civil and businesslike as possible. There was no room for sentimentality now. As we wrapped up the discussion, I stood up from the table, ready to leave. But Jessica wasn't done yet. She reached out, her hand trembling as she touched my arm. "Tom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know you don't want to hear this, but I'm so sorry. For everything. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen." I looked down at her, my heart heavy with the weight of her words. Part of me wanted to believe her, to find some small comfort in her apology. But the damage had been done, and no amount of regret could change that. "I know you're sorry, Jessica," I said quietly, gently pulling my arm away from her grasp. "But it doesn't change anything. We're done. We have to be." Tears welled up in her eyes and she nodded, finally accepting the truth. "I understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. I want you to know that I'll always love you, Tom. No matter what." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep my emotions in check. "Take care of yourself, Jessica," I said, my voice soft but firm. "I hope you find peace." With that, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her behind for the last time. As I stepped out of the house, the air felt different, lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The decision had been made, the final conversation had been had, and now it was time to move on. The drive back to the hotel was quiet, the city slowly coming to life around me. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching the world from a distance, disconnected from everything that was happening. But I knew that was just the beginning of the healing process, the numbness that would eventually give way to grief, and then, hopefully, to acceptance. When I arrived back at the hotel, I found myself drawn to the small bar in the lobby. I wasn't much of a drinker, but today felt like an exception. I ordered a whiskey, neat, and took it to a quiet corner of the room, letting the warmth of the drink spread through me. As I sat there, the events of the past few days played out in my mind like a movie on repeat. The discovery of Jessica's affair, the confrontation, the revenge, and now, the finality of the divorce. It had all happened so quickly, and yet it felt like it had been dragging on for a lifetime. I thought about what Marcia had said earlier, how I was doing the right thing by moving forward with the divorce. And deep down, I knew she was right. There was no point in holding on to something that was already broken beyond repair. But knowing that didn't make it any easier. My phone buzzed on the table, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a message from Marcia. "The papers have been filed. Jessica will be served today. Let me know if you need anything." I stared at the message for a moment, the finality of it sinking in. The papers had been filed. The process had officially begun. There was no turning back now. Setting the phone down, I took another sip of whiskey, the burn in my throat grounding me in the present. This was the beginning of the end, but it was also the beginning of something new. A new life, a new future. One that I would shape for myself, free from the shadows of betrayal. As the day turned into evening, I found myself thinking about what came next. The legal process would take time, and there would be challenges along the way, but I was ready to face them. I had already taken the first steps toward reclaiming my life, and now it was just a matter of seeing it through to the end. The sun was setting as I left the bar, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. I walked outside, taking a deep breath of the cool evening air. The city was alive with the sounds of people going about their lives, unaware of the personal battles being fought behind closed doors. And as I stood there, watching the world move on, I realized that I was ready to do the same. The pain of Jessica's betrayal would take time to heal, but I was determined to move forward, to rebuild my life piece by piece. The divorce was just the beginning. The rest of my life was waiting, and I was ready to embrace it. With one last look at the city skyline, I turned and walked back into the hotel, ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed were filled with a strange mix of emotions, relief, sorrow, and a deep sense of exhaustion that seemed to permeate every part of me. The divorce proceedings had officially begun, and while there was still a long road ahead, I knew that the hardest part was over. I had made the decision to move on, and now it was time to focus on rebuilding my life from the ground up. After that last conversation with Jessica, I didn't hear from her again. I assumed she had signed the papers, resigned to the fact that our marriage was beyond repair. Marcia had assured me that the process would be as smooth as possible, given the circumstances, and I trusted her to handle the legal side of things. My focus was on healing, on figuring out who I was now that the life I had known for so many years had been shattered. One of the first steps I took was finding a new place to live. The house we had shared was being put on the market, and I knew I couldn't stay in the hotel forever. I needed a fresh start, a space that was entirely my own, untainted by the memories of my failed marriage. After a few weeks of searching, I found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of the city. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom with a modest kitchen and a cozy living room. But it was mine, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Moving into the apartment was bittersweet. I brought only the essentials with me, leaving behind most of the furniture and decorations that Jessica and I had picked out together. The new space was minimalist, almost barren, but it felt like a blank canvas, ready to be filled with new memories, new experiences. I spent the first few days unpacking and settling in, trying to create a sense of normalcy in the midst of all the chaos. It was strange, living alone after so many years of marriage. The silence was both comforting and unsettling, a constant reminder of the emptiness that had taken root in my life. But I knew that this was just part of the process, a necessary step toward reclaiming my independence. As I settled into my new routine, I found myself reconnecting with parts of myself that had been neglected for far too long. I started going to the gym again, rediscovering the joy of physical activity and the sense of accomplishment that came with pushing my limits. I took up photography, a hobby I had dabbled in years ago but had never fully pursued. Wandering through the city with a camera in hand, capturing the world around me, became a form of therapy, a way to see beauty in the everyday and to remind myself that life still held moments of wonder, even in the midst of pain. Work became a welcome distraction as well. I threw myself into my job, taking on new projects and responsibilities, eager to prove to myself that I could still succeed, still thrive, even in the face of personal turmoil. My colleagues noticed the change in me, and while a few close friends knew about the divorce, most of them simply assumed I was going through a rough patch. I didn't share the details, didn't burden them with the weight of my betrayal. This was my battle to fight, and I was determined to come out the other side stronger. But as much as I tried to focus on moving forward, there were still moments when the past would catch up with me. I would catch a glimpse of a couple holding hands on the street, or hear a song on the radio that reminded me of Jessica, and the pain would come rushing back, sharp and unrelenting. It was in those moments that I realized just how deeply her betrayal had cut me, how much I still had to heal. Therapy became an important part of that healing process. I'd always been skeptical of talking to a stranger about my problems, but I knew I couldn't do this alone. My therapist, Dr. Ellis, was a calm, reassuring presence, guiding me through the tangled mess of emotions that had been left in the wake of my divorce. He helped me see that it was okay to grieve, to feel angry, to mourn the loss of the life I had planned. But more importantly, he helped me understand that those emotions didn't have to define me. "You're allowed to feel hurt, Tom," he said during one of our sessions. "But don't let that hurt keep you stuck in the past. You have a future ahead of you, one that you have the power to shape. It's okay to take your time, but remember that healing is an active process. It requires you to keep moving forward, even when it's hard." His words resonated with me, and I began to approach each day with a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just surviving, I was actively working towards something better, something stronger. The small victories, finishing a project at work, capturing a perfect photo, getting through a day without thinking about Jessica, became the building blocks of my new life. And with each one, I felt a little more like myself again. As the weeks turned into months, I started to see glimpses of the future I had been too afraid to imagine. I reconnected with old friends, people I had lost touch with during the years of my marriage, and found comfort in their support and understanding. I even began to explore the idea of dating again, though I knew I wasn't quite ready for anything serious. It was more about proving to myself that I could still be open to new possibilities, that I wasn't defined by the betrayal I had endured. One evening, as I was sitting on the balcony of my apartment, Watching the sun set over the city, I realized just how far I had come. The man who had been shattered by his wife's affair, who had sought revenge as a way to cope with his pain, was slowly but surely finding his way back to himself. The road to recovery was long, and there were still days when the weight of the past threatened to pull me under, but I was learning to navigate it, one step at a time. I thought about Jessica, about the life we had shared, and for the first time, I didn't feel the familiar sting of anger or sorrow. Instead, there was a quiet acceptance, a sense of peace that came from knowing that I had done everything I could to move forward. Jessica had been a part of my life, and though that chapter had ended in heartbreak, it didn't mean that the rest of my story had to follow the same path. I took a deep breath, letting the cool evening air fill my lungs, and allowed myself to imagine the future, one that was still unwritten, still full of possibilities. I didn't know what it would look like, didn't know who would be a part of it, but I knew one thing for certain. It would be mine. Shaped by my choices, my dreams, and my determination to rise above the pain that had once threatened to consume me. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, I stood up and walked back inside, closing the door on the past and stepping fully into the new life that awaited me. The journey had been long, and it wasn't over yet, but I was ready to face whatever came next. I was ready to live again. The future was mine, and I was finally free to embrace it.